Greetings and salutations, everyone. My name is Andrew Kirchhoff, and welcome to my YouTube channel. Today, we're talking about my Week 1 wide receiver starter sets going into the 2019 fantasy football season. On today's episode, we're going to be going over my 1 through 36 wide receiver rankings while talking about the upside of some players, matchups, and much more. So before we get into today's video, let me remind all of you that if you haven't yet joined the community, click that subscribe button and join, because I will be bringing fantasy football content for the entirety of the 2019 fantasy football season. Waiver wire targets on Mondays, running back start and sits on Tuesdays, just like yesterday. Wide receiver Wednesdays, quarterbacks and tight ends before the Thursday night matchup every Thursday. Hidden gems on Friday. I know many of you are waiting for that gauntlet to be released, and boy, am I excited for that. Live streams on the weekends and much more content coming your way. So please join the community and click that bell notification button. Also, last announcement. If you guys haven't checked out my Patreon, the link is down in the description, where you can get all of your 2019 fantasy football questions answered, whether it's flex rankings, whether it's help me set my lineup, all of it, I will take care of it. Just go check it out. All the information is there. Link down in the description. Hey, everybody. Okay, let's talk about wide receivers, right? I know we're all chomping at the bit. We all want to get our lineup set, whether it's figuring out who you want to put at the wide receiver 3, who do we want to put at your flex, who we want to deal with at the defensive position, because I know many of you like to stream defenses, as do I. But before we begin, I got a couple things I want to say. Number one, there's timestamps down below. So, as per usual, if you have a specific player that you want to go and hear me talk about, go ahead. You don't have to, watch the entire thing. I understand, a 40-minute long is pretty long-winded. 40-minute long video, is pretty long-winded. But if you guys have a couple players you just want to go and get some information about, be my guest, no problem. Go down, it's in the description of the video. A couple things that I also wanted to mention. Yesterday I put out my running backs video. Again, rankings are always subject to change. Ezekiel Elliott, like I was talking about, did sign that 6-year, $90 million contract. Another piece of information that came out having to do with another holdout running back, Melvin Gordon. There's a little bit of whispers going around in the National Football League that he might land with the Philadelphia Eagles, and a couple ideas were thrown around, or speculation rumors, that Jordan Howard has been offered with a pick in exchange for Melvin Gordon. Now, we don't know if that deal is actually being thrown around or whether it's even a serious concept, but to be honest, if Melvin Gordon can land with the Eagles with one of the best offensive lines, a great quarterback, a great scheme, oh man, I mean, for fantasy purposes, it's incredible. I mean, we know Melvin Gordon, whether he's on the Chargers or not, is a great running back, but with the Eagles, holy moly. Jordan Howard going to the Chargers would hurt Austin Eckler and Justin Jackson owners, because he's going to slug pretty much all of the early down work. But those are all speculations. A couple other things that came out that I know many of you wanted to point out to me. Matt Breida was named the unofficial starter on their depth chart. Obviously, it's an unofficial list, but it probably is going to trend toward that direction, so we have to adjust accordingly. So all of that. That's why rankings are subject to change, and that's why if you join my Patreon, that's where you can get my updated rankings. I know many of you may be thinking, Andrew, hey, why don't you answer questions anymore? If I answer your question on a Tuesday, that information can be absolutely irrelevant by Saturday. That's just how it works. So if I spend time answering the questions now, or if I spend 18 plus hours on a Saturday, it's so much easier. Just join the Patreon. It's there in text form. I'm always posting, always answering as many questions. But anyway, let's get into it. Let's talk about wide receivers this week, because that's what today's episode is about, and I cannot be more excited. The group of wide receivers this year, I mean, putting together a top 36 list is tough, because I think there are at least 48 wide receivers that have a viable option to be started this week. But as we all know, many of your leagues only use 2 starting wide receiver positions and then potentially a flex or perhaps a third wide receiver spot. So we're talking about the top 36 at the position. Just like yesterday, the top 12 at the position are guys that you should start and never worry about. The thing about the wide receiver position is that there have been so many combinations of players that will make wide receiver 1 performances by the end of the week that are unpredictable. You never know if a guy like Albert Wilson for the Miami Dolphins is going to catch 2 touchdowns and 150 yards from Ryan Fitzpatrick this week and end up being the number 1 overall wide receiver. Why? Because he's capable of doing so, and wide receivers are inconsistent in that way. One week they'll come and have a blow-up week. The next week they're garbage, a la Tyreek Hill. But anyway, let's talk about these guys. My number one wide receiver on the week is DeAndre Hopkins. Oh, you know what? Before we even begin, completely forgot. I know you guys want to talk about matchups, so let's transition into that, shall we? Okay, we're here. Many of you are going to be asking, Andrew, do you have the matchup page? I got it. Okay, we almost went off without it, but here we are. So we're looking at this matchup page. This was how much opposing defenses were giving wide receivers, or how much opposing wide receivers were giving defenses struggles, pretty much. The New Orleans Saints last season were giving up the most points to the wide receiver position as a core group. I mean, they were nearly just, 36 fantasy points. The Jets were just as bad, and they're probably just as sorry of a secondary going into 2019. The Eagles dealt with so many injuries last year, but just giving you a little bit of perspective on how good secondaries and defenses were at stopping wide receivers. As you can see, the team that was the best against the wide receiver position, these guys aren't surprising. The Jacksonville Jaguars with Jalen Ramsey, they're going to get after, especially against the Kansas City Chiefs in week 1. That's going to be an exciting matchup, and I can't wait for that. But just to kind of give you guys some perspective, these were the amount of points teams were allowing on a weekly basis by week 17 on average of last season. So just to give you some perspective on the matter. Now, let's go ahead and let's talk about my number one wide receiver, finally getting into it. DeAndre Hopkins playing against the New Orleans Saints, who gave up the most points to the wide receiver position last season. Plain and simple, DeAndre Hopkins is a first-round pick, was your first-round pick, and must start. I don't think there's anything else I need to say. If you want to go out and make the argument that Will Fuller and Kenny Stills and Duke Johnson, there are other receivers that could hurt his potential, I doubt it. Because the fact of the matter is that DeAndre Hopkins is going to get his targets. He is the number one wide receiver of this offense, and he is probably the best wide receiver in the National Football League. He's my number one, going into a great matchup this coming Sunday. Moving on to number 2, Odell Beckham Jr. You guys heard me talk about it yesterday. I love the prospect of the Browns playing against this weak secondary of the Tennessee Titans. The Titans have struggled much as of late in the secondary, and they've given up a lot of points to opposing wide receivers. And I think Odell Beckham and Baker Mayfield, they're coming out to make a statement. And unfortunately, the Titans are going to be their first victim. I have OBJ as my number 2 wide receiver on the week. Not too much of a surprise. These are guys that you have to start because they are such elite wide receivers no matter what. But either way, great matchup. He's my number 2 this week. Moving on to my number 3, Michael Thomas playing against the Houston Texans. That's right, the Houston Texans. Thing about the Houston Texans, to be honest, it doesn't matter who Michael Thomas plays. Michael Thomas is one of the most efficient wide receivers in NFL history in terms of catching the ball. I mean, last season, what did he have? Nearly an 80-something percent, I think it was 85% catch rate. He caught 85% of his targets. Michael Thomas is unbelievable. When you have Drew Brees and a team that gets to the red zone so often, Michael Thomas is just innately going to have so much value. For those of you who had purchased the 2019 draft kit, you'll know that Michael Thomas is far and away better when the guy is getting 10-plus targets a game. I'm hoping he's going to find that in this kind of a shootout between Deshaun Watson and Brees, so that that kind of a shootout promotes Michael Thomas to that next level. He's my number 3 this week. Moving on to number 4, Davante Adams. Here's the thing about Davante Adams. It's a tough matchup, but he has been successful in the past against the Bears. Go look at the 2 matchups he had last season against the Bears. He had 80 yards and a touchdown in week 1, and in the final week, I think he had about 13 targets, 9 receptions, and over 100 receiving yards in the second game. So he, by himself, is going to be fine. Him and Aaron Rodgers will be fine within one another. But the rest of the offense for the Packers could hurt Davante Adams. If Davante Adams ends up struggling, I doubt that's going to happen. He is an elite wide receiver. A lot of people forget about him. Fantasy-wise, he is going to be Aaron Rodgers' number 1 target. And anybody who's Aaron Rodgers' number 1 target is going to be relevant in fantasy no matter what. He's my number 4 this week. Sure, it's a tougher matchup, but I 100% have a lot of confidence in Adams at number 4. Number 5, Mike Evans going against the 49ers this coming week. Here's the thing about Mike Evans. A lot of people don't really see him as a deep threat. The guy had the second most catches of 20-plus yards last season. And Jameis Winston's going to have to take the top off of this defense. Yes, Richard Sherman will probably be all over him. a bigger cornerback, but I don't think Richard Sherman's going to be able to keep up with Mike Evans. I really think Mike Evans into a better matchup, into a game that I think it's, if I'm not mistaken, they play it in Tampa. You know what? That's really a good question. How is the weather going to be with those hurricanes that are going to hit Jacksonville or the coast down there with Georgia and the Carolinas? That's something we got to look into, guys. I'll do my due diligence. I'll look into that. But either way, at home, week 1, Jameis Winston with a new head coach. Mike Evans it's an automatic start. He's my number 5 this week. Number 6, Juju Smith-Schuster. This will be the first game without Antonio Brown, at least his presence around the Steelers organization. Sure, last season he played a couple games. Juju Smith-Schuster played a couple games without Antonio Brown. But that being said, Juju Smith has to be one of the better wide receivers in the NFL into a tough matchup. We know Bill Belichick wants to double number 1 wide receivers. He does it every time. He's going to put Stephon Gilmore in the face of Juju. He's going to put McCourty or somebody over the top, and they're going to give him hell. They're going to make him struggle. I think Juju Smith-Schuster, as long as they move him around the formation, whether they put him in the slot or outside, he's going to be the number 1 wide receiver of this team, and the team is really going to be dependent on whether he and James Conner can move the ball. I think it could be a rough matchup for him, but I'm hoping that Juju finds some success. Again, another one of these guys that can catch a slant and go 90 yards, which he's done many times in his career. Moving on to number 7, Tyreek Hill on the thumbnail, playing against Jalen Ramsey. Again, it was quoted a couple weeks back that Jalen Ramsey is going to shadow Tyreek Hill. But the thing about that, Tyreek Hill literally needs to have you stumble for a half a step, and the guy's going to be gone. He's the fastest player in the National Football League. If you do not keep on his hip, if you don't know where he is, he's going to disappear in the secondary, and he's going to catch a 70-yard bomb for a touchdown, and his fantasy week's going to be over. Now, why do I have him at number 7? Inherently, this matchup's going to be tough, and if it does rain there in Jacksonville, or there's any sort of storm implication, it could shy the Chiefs away from passing the ball, which could hurt Tyreek Hill. But either way, it's a tough matchup. All he needs is one bomb. He's the number 7, so you're starting him up anyway. But just to kind of give you my idea, he's my number 7. Moving on. Let's talk about Julio Jones. Playing against Xavier Rhodes, another tough cornerback. This is the thing. This is a reoccurring kind of segment. When you play against tough cornerbacks that have good safeties playing over the top, and opposing defenses are going to have to double cover you. Sure, they have to respect Calvin Ridley and Austin Hooper and Mohamed Sanu and Devontae Freeman. Sure, they're going to have to. But Julio Jones is going to be doubled for the majority of the game, as he should be, which doesn't mean he's going to be absolutely irrelevant in this offense. Julio Jones is a top-tier he's my number 3 wide receiver on the season. He's got a lot of talent, and he's probably going to go for 100 receiving yards somewhere here. But that touchdown, that ever-elusive touchdown, if you can have, 7 receptions for 100 yards, you only end up with 13.5 points. That touchdown is the biggest difference. Julio's touchdown, efficiency, 11 in the last 2 years, it's not great. So hopefully we can find him in the end zone or see some big yardage, but he's my number 8 this week. Moving on to number 9, Adam Thielen, playing against Julio, but not exactly. They play against the Falcons. Adam Thielen, from what we've seen in this preseason, Adam Thielen is ridiculous, man. Him and Kirk Cousins on that deep ball continue to just amaze against number 1 corners. It does not matter who they're playing against. It was Lattimore that he caught that amazing pass against in the preseason. We know Adam Thielen is capable of being one of the best wide receivers in the NFL. For the first 5 weeks of the 2018 season, he was the number 1 wide receiver. The guy had caught, 8-9 consecutive games of 100-plus receiving yards. Plain and simple, Adam Thielen is a monster. Yes, he struggled for the second half of the season because defenses respected him even more, had to double cover him, leaving Stefon Diggs, who we'll talk about in a bit, open very often. But then again, Adam Thielen, if you forget about him, the guy is going to scorch you. He can play on the outside, play in the slot, and he's got a great matchup this week. He's my number 9. Moving on to number 10, Antonio Brown. A little bit of information that I saw today on my Sleeper app. If you don't have the Sleeper app already, go download it. I'm telling you, the Sleeper app, free on iOS, Android. It's not even a sponsor. It's so damn good. I have to mention it to everybody in the fantasy football community. It's an application that is going to send you notifications when anything happens, a trade, an injury, coach says something in a press conference that seems fantasy relevant. It will end up at your phone pronto. So go and download that. I guarantee you will not regret it. Also, you can draft teams on there. You can play Dynasty. There's chats, everything's on that app. All right, but anyway, we're talking about Antonio Brown specifically. Here's the thing. I heard that he was fined like $50-something thousand for not showing up to practice as of late. Oh my goodness. Come on, Antonio Brown. Not only, did you have to do the helmet issues, the bottom of your feet has been messed up this offseason, but you get to play against the Denver Broncos in week 1, which is not an easy matchup to say the very least. It's going to be tough. I think what they have, Jonathan Joseph. They have, is Chris Harris Jr. still playing cornerback over there? They're going to have somebody just clamped up on him. That's for certain. And Derek Carr is going to have to run for his life because that front seven's coming. Bradley Chubb and Von Miller, they're coming. Plain and simple. Derek Wolfe, they're going to get after you. So Antonio Brown, still one of the best wide receivers in the National Football League. Hopefully his week 1 performance can put everything behind him and he can go forward into this 2019 season with the Raiders as a top receiver. He's my number 10. You drafted him to be your starter. Therefore, you got to play him. Just like Aaron Jones. I know many of you yesterday, we talked about Aaron Jones. Sure, he has a tough matchup, but you drafted him to play him. Sure, it might not be a great matchup, but he can still find value in the passing game or potentially somewhere else. I don't know where he's going to find it anyway. Moving on to number 11, like we mentioned before, Stefon Diggs. Really had a great season last year, had just as many targets and just as many receptions as Adam Thielen with 2 less games played because of injuries. Stefon Diggs is a guy that's going to get injured. But when he's healthy, he has to be in your starting lineup, plain and simple. The guy is way too good, and especially with the combination of Kirk Cousins, just took an extra step forward last season, was a top 12 wide receiver by season's end in half PPR last year. He's my number 11 this week in a great matchup again against the Falcons. I love Stefon Diggs, so fire him up and get him in there. Moving on to 12, Keenan Allen. Keenan Allen has a tough matchup, plain and simple. That is a given. But Keenan Allen, the fact that he is the number 1 wide receiver of this team is not going to waver. Whether Melvin Gordon is there or not, Keenan Allen is going to get his ample amount of 10-plus targets a week from Phillip Rivers. Now that Hunter Henry is back, there is a potential that Keenan Allen does not find the red zone because you have Mike Williams, you have Hunter Henry, and then you have running backs. You have Travis Benjamin that could take the top off the defense as their number 3 wide receiver. Keenan Allen is going to have to find a lot of his value from receptions in a PPR format and a lot of yards. Touchdowns are very elusive, and honestly, outside of 6 a year, Keenan Allen's not going to find much else. So the number 12 spot might be a little bit overzealous for his positioning and the matchup this week, but I have confidence that Keenan Allen in a week 1, he's going to come out and he's going to perform. Moving on to my wide receiver 2s on the week. All right, so let me go ahead and adjust myself. Let's get some water in my system. It's hot over here in California. I'm dying. Okay, so here we go. My 13 through 24 guys that, without a doubt in my mind, again, should be started because you drafted them to be your starters. These are all wide receiver 1s and 2s, whether they have big weeks or not. These guys are going to be your consistent plays at your number 2 wide receiver spot. Sure, you might have Robert Woods or Amari Cooper at your number 1, but these guys, they have to play plain and simple, especially into this week's matchups. Number 13, we have Robert Woods to start off my wide receiver 2 conversation. You play against the Carolina Panthers, and Jared Goff just got the money. Jared Goff's got to prove to everyone why that Super Bowl performance in the playoffs in the second half of the 2018 season was a fluke. The Rams have a lot to prove in week 1. They've got to shut a lot of people up this week. Robert Woods, without a doubt in my mind, is the number 1 wide receiver of this team. I know a lot of people are thinking, hey, Sean McVay was talking about Brandin Cooks and getting him more involved. Robert Woods is the number 1 of this team. Whether they run the ball heavily or not, whether Cooper Kupp is there or not, Robert Woods is the most consistent wide receiver on this team, plain and simple, comparatively to Brandin Cooks, whether they get the same amount of targets or not. Woods is always finding himself in great positions. He's my number 13 this week. Number 14, Amari Cooper. Now, For those of you who are on the Patreon, Amari Cooper was a little bit lower ranked yesterday, but because of the fact that he's cleared and healthy, he's been dealing with plantar fasciitis this entire offseason, another injury that, man, if you guys haven't experienced, you literally cannot walk around. It hurts to walk. Your heel is just, it feels like it's ready to pop. And it feels like someone's stabbing you in the heel. But Amari Cooper, this coming week, cleared to be healthy, has been participating in practice. You get Zeke back. Defenses are going to have to step up, fill the box, and test Zeke. Against one of the better offensive lines in the NFL with Travis Frederick coming back, Amari Cooper's going to have a great opportunity against this secondary of the Giants to have a great performance. He's my number 14. Number 15, Kenny Golladay. Kenny G, the number one for the for the Lions. Playing against Patrick Peterson. Here's the thing about Patrick Peterson. There's always a chance that Pat P gets put on Marvin Jones depending on how their formations line up. But I do not think that Kenny Golladay is going to... Look, here's the thing about Kenny Golladay. It's tricky because the way I see it with Kenny Golladay, I expect him to have 5 catches for 80 yards. But that touchdown, again, it's so elusive. Because they have so many damn weapons with this Lions team going into 2019, you drafted Hawkinson. You still have Marvin Jones, who is a great red zone receiving threat. You have Amendola. You have CJ Anderson for goal line work. Kerryon Johnson absolutely is the number one running back of that team. There's a lot of opportunity for touchdowns to be stolen from a Kenny Golladay. But I think the number 15 spot sits pretty safe for him. I don't think he's going to be much worse or much better. I think it's a solid spot. I'll leave him at 15. We'll leave it there. Number 16, Chris Godwin. Here's the thing, guys. I've been talking about Chris Godwin all offseason long to the extent that he's going to be prepped for a pretty big season. A lot of the offseason hype was coming from Bruce Arians saying he's going to be the Larry Fitzgerald of this offense. I'm going to feed him 100 receptions. This guy is going to be the number one receiver of this team. I'm like, holy moly. If the head coach is saying all of this, why shouldn't we believe it? Is he just blowing smoke? Is he gassing this guy up? Chris Godwin in this offseason has been fantastic. In the preseason, once he was, he played all 51 snaps with Jameis Winston that Jameis Winston played this preseason. On top of it, when he played in the slot position, the guy had like 8 targets, 6 receptions, 70-some-odd yards, and a touchdown on 33 snaps total from the slot. I know for a fact that Chris Godwin is going to be heavily used this coming season. There's no more Adam Humphries or Deshaun Jackson to steal targets from a guy like this who in week 1 against the 49ers at home, it's a really good matchup. He's my number 16 wide receiver, guy that I really like going throughout the 2019 season. Brandin Cooks at my number 17 spot. Brandin Cooks, I mean, it's pretty much identical conversation that we had with Robert Woods. Sure, Robert Woods is the number 1 of this team, but Brandin Cooks is still going to get, 6, 7, 8 targets. And if he can line up with 8 targets, the guy is extremely efficient. It only takes one pass for this guy to break the top off the defense and go to the house. Depending on what kind of formations this Rams team comes out with, we're anticipating that 3 wide set because they have Cooper Kupp back. And whether or not Cooper Kupp's there, sure, they have Josh Reynolds. But I expect Brandin Cooks, who's been a consistent receiver in the NFL, to have another good game here as a wide receiver too. He's my number 17. Nothing much else that we need to talk about. I mean, it's pretty straightforward. I do not think that the Carolina defense is going to be able to stop all the pieces of the Rams, and Jared Goff is going to have a good day. Whether or not Gurley finds the end zone 2 times, that remains to be seen. All right, number 18, Tyler Lockett, playing against the Bengals. The Bengals are one of the worst defenses in the NFL, plain and simple. I think if you have Wilson, Carson, Penny, Lockett, those are guys that should be considered to be started this week, whether, Penny obviously would have to be in the flex in a deeper league, 12-team or plus. But Lockett, Wilson, and Carson have to start this week. It is a fantastic matchup. We have yet to see Lockett play in a full game at this slot position where Doug Baldwin sat last year. We know that only 70 targets last season from Tyler Lockett is not enough to give us confidence that he's going to score another 10 touchdowns. We need to see something more from him, and hopefully we're going to go ahead and see that in week 1 as the Seattle Seahawks don't really have much else at the receiver position. Sure, you have Jerron Brown DK Metcalf coming out off that injury from the knee scope. But Tyler Lockett for sure is the number 1. He's my number 18 this week. All right, moving on to number 19, Julian Edelman, who has dealt with some thumb injuries this offseason, broke his thumb and then jammed it again in the last preseason game. He shouldn't have even been on the field. That's just terrible decision-making. But, they're going to have to deal with the decisions that they've made. The thing about Julian Edelman, he's a reliable wide receiver. The guy he's been so good when Gronkowski has not been on the field, and he has been just as consistent with Josh Gordon on the field. I think against the Pittsburgh Steelers in Week 1, the Patriots are going to heavily target Julian Edelman, plain and simple. If he's healthy and he's on the field, he's the number 1 for Tom Brady, and he's my number 19 this coming week. Moving on to number 20, Cooper Kupp. Yes, I have all of my 3 Rams wide receivers in the top 20 of this week. I'm telling you, the Carolina Panthers are going to have to keep up. I'm telling you, just wait. They're going to have to keep up. Now, if that storm hits and it's if it's a complete mess and it's raining and it's pouring because it's an outdoor stadium, they might have to even call that. We'll see what happens. I don't know. Maybe I gotta do some research. But anyway, moving on. Cooper Kupp, we have not seen him play since he tore his ACL. Sure, he hasn't played. I mean, he's pretty relatively quick to come off this injury. Typically, it takes guys 11 to 12 months to recover from a surgery like that, and have full, mobility and confidence in that knee, and just get rid of the fear of it. So as of right now, Cooper Kupp's trying to be the statistic that breaks that in Week 1 of the 2019 season. I think he has a pretty good chance of doing so as Jared Goff's number 1, security blanket of that offense over the middle in that slot position. So, Cooper, you are my number 20. Moving on to 21, Alshon Jeffery. Great matchup. You play against the Redskins. The Redskins are going to struggle. Case Keenum is their quarterback, sure. Their offensive line's going to have to figure it out. But on the other side of the football, we know Carson Wentz, Zach Ertz, and Alshon Jeffery are all going to score fantasy points consistently. When Alshon Jeffery is on the field with Carson Wentz, he is getting more targets comparatively to when Nick Foles was the quarterback. It only helps that Carson Wentz is at quarterback. They have established this offensive line. They're going to protect their quarterback. Sure, they've made some adjustments in the running game. Alshon Jeffery is going to be a great wide receiver this year. I know many of you don't like the prospect of Alshon Jeffery, but in the last 2 seasons, he has been great for the Philadelphia Eagles, especially since he, even last year, had a 70% catch rate, which was the highest of his career. So he's getting better over time. Moving on to number 22, Dede Westbrook. Let's go, Dede Westbrook. Here's the thing. He's going to be the number 1 for the Jaguars going forward. He plays the slot position, which Nick Foles loves throwing the ball to. Even what we've seen from this offseason and the preseason, Dede Westbrook and Nick Foles have that combination together. They're going to be great this week against the Kansas City Chiefs defense. He's my number 22 on the week. Now moving on to number 23, similar to Odell Beckham. Sure, Odell Beckham might be my number 2, but Jarvis Landry is going to get his share. Jarvis Landry, sure, I mean, many of you may be thinking, there's no way, Andrew, he's going to get 100-plus targets. Absolutely he is. This coming season, if Baker Mayfield last season threw the ball 35.5 times per game, if you times that by 16 in games that that was in the 13 games that he started, 35.5 times per game, there is going to be, he's going to throw the ball 600 times this year. There's going to be an opportunity for Jarvis Landry to have 125 targets. A lot of people are sleeping on him. He's probably one of my biggest sleepers of the year in terms of ADP value from this offseason. I love the matchup for him. He's my number 23 wide receiver. Moving on to a guy in the similar AFC North division, Tyler Boyd. The thing about Tyler Boyd, without AJ Green in the lineup, he struggles heavily because he cannot play in that slot position and dominate. Now that we have to see him move to the outside, he's going to face some trouble. It's really going to be dependent on whether Andy Dalton can deliver the ball in the pocket while he's running for his life. Sure, I believe Tyler Boyd is going to get an ample amount of targets, 10 plus probably this week, because truly outside of Tyler Boyd and Joe Mixon and maybe a CJ Uzomah, there really isn't much else in this offense to look forward to. And I think as the number 1, whether it's in garbage time or early in the game, Tyler Boyd is going to be able to produce for you. He's my number 24, the last of the wide receiver 2s of this week. Moving on to the last group of wide receivers here. Guys that, again, you drafted to start on your team. I mean, just looking at these names, right? Hilton, Pettis, Gordon, Ridley, Fuller, Williams, Jones, Moore. These are guys that you drafted to start, plain and simple. These are guys, sure, that could be potentially on your bench and be considered as flex plays this week if you only can start 2 wide receivers and you have 2 of the top 24. But I'm going to talk about these guys because I know, similar to me, you guys play in leagues where you can start 3 wide receivers, and these are very important plays that are going to give you either that boom or that safety to pretty much lock down wins in week 1. All right, let's talk about my number 25, T.Y. Hilton. Sure, T.Y. Hilton, if Andrew Luck was playing this week, would probably be in my top 10 wide receivers. The uncertainty of Jacoby Brissett leads me to believe that, sure, T.Y. Hilton is a reliable wide receiver, but not to the extent to where I can 100% without a doubt in my mind say he's a top 24 wide receiver with Brissett. We've seen him struggle in the past. It's going to be a real test. After week 1, we'll get a little bit of a taste because the secondary of the Chargers, they may be missing Derwin James, who was moved to the IR due to that foot injury, but they still have very good cornerbacks. They have a great defense, and it's going to be tough for Jacoby Brissett. But I still think T.Y. Hilton, as the number 1 wide receiver, they're a guy that can really make his fantasy week up in one play, has a great opportunity. So he's my number 25 this week. Moving on to 26, we have Dante Pettis, a guy that, again, has been slept on a lot this offseason because of the reports that came out of that organization. The thing about the 49ers is they're very deceptive. One week they'll say Tevin Coleman's the guy, then the next week it's Matt Breida unofficially. Then one week they're saying Dante Pettis isn't even a starter, and then the following week he's the number 1 wide receiver. I don't know if it's just inside their organization they're trying to self-motivate their players to step up and become the number 1s of their respective teams or position, but either way, Dante Pettis plays against a very poor secondary of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers in week 1. Jimmy Garoppolo and Dante Pettis will be just fine. You have George Kittle, but really, receiver-wise, I don't see Marquise Goodwin or Kendrick Bourne stepping up and taking touches away from a guy like Dante Pettis to the point where he's irrelevant. I think as a wide receiver 3 with upside in a great matchup, I really like Pettis. He's my number 26. Moving on to 27, Josh Gordon. Yes, I'm not kidding. We're running Josh Gordon as my number 27 wide receiver on the week. He looks good, plain and simple. He's in shape. He's practiced. He knows the playbook, and he's ready. And week 1 is a great way to start your comeback season again. Yeah, it might be I don't know how many comeback seasons you could possibly have. I don't know if there's a limit to that number. But Josh Gordon technically will be the number 1 outside receiver for this team. He may not see as many targets or touches, receptions as Edelman or James White within this offense, but he is definitely going to be a threat that in the red zone is going to be looked toward as a bigger target that could find himself some pretty comfortable fantasy points. He's a good wide receiver 3 this week. He's my number 27. Moving on to number 28, Calvin Ridley. Calvin Ridley could have a better week than 28. Truth be told, the thing is, the number 2 cornerback for the Vikings, especially last year, I just remembered this right now. The Vikings, for a good amount of time last year, their second cornerback were giving up a lot of fantasy points to opposing wide receivers. I don't know if that cornerback is still there. I got to look into that. But I think Calvin Ridley could have a better week if, in fact, Julio is just being keyed in on and doubled and completely blanketed by the secondary. Calvin Ridley could find himself in one of those games where he's scoring touchdowns in the red zone because nobody's looking for him and he's finding his way in the end zone. It's always a possibility. He's my number 28 wide receiver. Again, he's in one of the one of the better passing offenses in the National Football League. He is the number 2 wide receiver there. That argument still remains to be seen between him and Mohamed Sanu, but he should be good this week as my number 28. Number 29, a guy that, again, like I'm talking about, boom or bust. This is what we look for. For the number 3 wide receiver on your team, you're looking for a guy that can either outplay his projection or a guy that is going to have a steady, steady income, a steady line of opportunity to where he can produce 8 to 9 fantasy points and keep you safe so you don't end up with a guy scoring 1 point. Will Fuller is one of those guys that, in my opinion, is a boom or bust kind of play. Will Fuller needs to score a touchdown to be relevant against the one of the worst secondaries in the National Football League in fantasy purposes last season. When you play against the Saints, who have given up so many points, Will Fuller has a really good opportunity. Again, in 13 games with Deshaun Watson as the starting quarterback, he scored 11 touchdowns. There's a really good chance that Will Fuller can be a good wide receiver here, score a touchdown, even be better than the number 29 spot, walk and get himself into that wide receiver 2 conversation. So number 29, we're just looking for upside when we play Will Fuller. Moving on to 30, another guy we're looking for upside. When you play against the Indianapolis Colts secondary, a good secondary, sure, they're young, but they've got talent there. Mike Williams is going to have to struggle to find his targets outside of the red zone. Whether it's Austin Eckler, Justin Jackson, Keenan Allen, Travis Benjamin, or Hunter Henry, there are a lot of mouths to feed in this offense. I'm anticipating that Mike Williams will be the official number 2 wide receiver of this team in terms of targets. The guy needs to see over 100 targets this year. Having 70 like he did last, or was it 60 targets last year for 40 some odd receptions? That's not enough. We need to see a guy like Mike Williams, talented wide receiver, get over 100 targets. And how is he going to end up doing that? He needs to see 8 in this kind of a week 1 matchup. Can he do that? I don't know, but only time will tell. No, not even 8. He needs like 6 or 7. That's it. Couple in the red zone, he should be fine. Moving on to number 31, another red zone guy, boom or bust. Look, this is where we're getting here. Marvin Jones. Sure, Marvin Jones can catch you similar to Kenny Golladay, 5 catches for 80 yards. But if he doesn't find the end zone, it's risky. And I think Kenny Golladay is probably the number 1 of that team. He's going to be looked towards more with Marvin Jones trying to catch up here, coming off that ACL injury. But either way, I like Marvin Jones in week 1 against a secondary that's not great. Patrick Peterson will be busy on one side of the field. If Marvin Jones finds himself with another cornerback, he could find himself in the end zone and putting up a good week. Moving on to 32, DJ Moore. DJ Moore, here's the thing. Marcus Peters is going to be on him. DJ Moore, I don't want to say it again, but he's kind of boom or bust. He's a receiver that's going to be used out of the backfield, going to have some opportunities here and there. But can he take the top off the defense? Can he find himself in the end zone? That's really what he struggled with last year. He didn't get many red zone opportunities because he's not a big wide receiver. But the number 1 wide receiver of the Carolina Panthers over the last couple of years, we've seen Kelvin Benjamin, Devin Funchess, now it's DJ Moore. DJ Moore is going to have to step up, and a lot of the targets, sure, they're going to go towards McCaffrey, and they're going to go towards Curtis Samuel, and they're going to go towards Greg Olsen. And that's why I'm a little worried about DJ Moore this week, and that's why I have him on my number 32 spot. Sure, he could be a great wide receiver, but as the number 3 wide receiver, I find more confidence with him, or at a number 3, not even at a flex, number 3 spot probably his best reliability as of right now. Moving on to number 33, Robby Anderson. Is Robby Anderson even healthy? That's my question. I have him here because I don't have a full, clear indication of whether or not he is cleared to go this coming Sunday. I think Robby Anderson is probably going to figure it out and end up playing. But if he's not fully healthy and that ankle is messing with him, he's another one of these receivers. Sure, he's got speed to take off the top of the defense, but he's got good route running. The guy needs to be able to cut properly, and if his ankle is not going to let him, he's going to struggle. Against a defense where, Tre'Davious White is going to be probably on top of him, it's going to be tough. It really is. So, Robby Anderson, you sit on my number 33 spot. We'll see how that game goes. Sterling Shepard at 34. Eli's got to throw somebody the ball, and I think Sterling Shepard probably has a good chance here and there of getting 6 receptions and 50 some odd yards. Even though the New York Giants aren't a great offense in terms of winning games on a consistent basis, they still have fantasy value, and that's what exactly Sterling Shepard presents as a wide receiver 3 going forward. Number 35, Allen Robinson. Kind of the same concept. Mitchell Trubisky has to throw the ball. He's going to have to. Now, whether he does it accurately or effectively, Allen Robinson is his number 1 in terms of technically speaking as of right now. Allen Robinson, in games that he was healthy and playing, he was decent. But can he consistently be that reliable number 1 wide receiver of this team? And is he going to be able to do that against the Packers? As a wide receiver 3, I don't mind him. But again, many of you know my opinions on Allen Robinson. I think it's very risky to play him in general. But So are a lot of the Bears this week. That Thursday night game is going to be really sketchy, I think. Moving on to my last wide receiver this week. As we hit the 40-minute mark, Emmanuel Sanders is going to close out this video. Emmanuel Sanders coming off an Achilles tear last season. Wide receiver that, yes, he is old. He's 31, 32. I really think he's going to be the number one wide receiver of this team. Joe Flacco is going to heavily target him. Emmanuel Sanders is going to go until he hurts himself once again. The last 2 years, he's missed significant time with foot injuries. So, however long that lasts, we're going to run it into the ground. Emmanuel Sanders, you should be the number one of this team playing against the Raiders. It's a good matchup. Could be better than the number 36, but I have, my confidence issues with you in terms of injury and health and whether or not Joe Flacco will really target you or go for Cortland Sutton or Noah Fant or how that offense is even going to run. But either way, that's the last wide receiver of my wide receiver 3 conversation. Thank you, everybody, for joining me. Hope you enjoyed today's video. Click that like button. Click the subscribe button if you haven't already. Go down to the comment section. Again, there are many people down there that want to answer your questions, that are there to help and do so. If you haven't yet already, go down below to the description. My Patreon link is down there for those of you who are interested. Go check it out. That's all I ask. Thank you again for much love and much support from all of you. This is fantastic. Tomorrow we'll be talking tight ends and quarterbacks in 2 separate videos, and then maybe we do a live stream before the Thursday night game. Probably. We'll see. But anyway, I want to thank everybody for watching again, and until tomorrow, I'll see you guys. Peace.